to this session. The title that I've selected for this session is Your Approach to BYOD Stinks. Probably. I added the probably because I didn't actually want to offend anybody by making anybody think that they really had made a bad decision in life. But the chances are that it does. And I'm going to kind of explain a little bit around why I think that we have a problem with BYOD in the world, and some of the ways that actually you can start to resolve some of the issues. But before I do, I'll just introduce myself and give you a little bit of information about my background and what it is that I do. I'm a technical evangelist. I also carry a program manager job title at Microsoft, and I sit across multiple parts of the company. So I get to have a one Microsoft view of Microsoft as we kind of think of it. And that means that I sit over Windows, and I also sit over the folks that make all of our enterprise management software, things like Configuration Manager and Active Directory and those kind of things. And I interface with all of those parts of the teams. I also spend a lot of my time at conferences, and I spend a lot of my time talking to my peers in the other parts of the world that actually do something very similar in other companies that may produce their own management software or their own management operating systems. And one of the things that has become very clear to me over the course of the past couple of years is that we've got this wrong. Not just Microsoft, not including everybody else. Everybody has got this wrong. The industry is kind of aimed for the wrong target here. And that's what I'm going to kind of explain. And the way I'm going to start off doing this is to try and draw on some of your experiences. So the very first thing that I want to say is, who's got some sort of enterprise mobility mobile device management system in place in their organization? Okay, that's a few people. Keep your hands up. Keep your hand up if you work in IT. Keep your hand up if your device is actually enrolled into that MDM system. Okay, that's quite telling. Around about half of the hands went down at that point. Isn't that interesting? Why the heck are IT people not allowing their own devices to be managed? We're all administrators of the environments that we're in. We probably have some of the most secure credentials inside of the organization. The emails that we receive probably have other users' passwords in there. And yet, our devices aren't necessarily managed and controlled. I actually started to do a little bit of kind of research around this and to try and understand what people were doing. Now, the first thing is to try and understand the idea of BYOD. And for anybody that's not familiar with the acronym, you must have been living under a rock for at least the past 4 or 5 years. It means it's the idea of having a personally owned device and bringing it into an office or school. Nothing inside of that mentions anything about managing the device. BYOD isn't necessarily a management thing. So, what's going on out there in the world? 2 graphs. On this side, what percentage of your employees have actually enrolled their devices? It's pretty staggering, but the largest number there is that if you're using BYOD, people haven't actually bothered to enroll their devices. That's pretty awful, actually. That means that organizations have paid for it, but haven't actually managed to get their users to do the enrollment. So there's got to be something wrong there. And then the other side is actually the same question. Have the IT guys enrolled their devices? And about 50-50 was the number that came out from that particular Twitter survey. So kind of interesting that that happens. Now, these 2 surveys are ones that I've done. I've actually polled all of the Twitter followers that I have, and those guys tend to be guys and girls that are actually doing what you do. They are IT folk that are out there. Normally they work with Windows, they work with iOS, they work with Android, they work with different management software, and it's kind of interesting. The other thing which is kind of interesting around this is if we look at all of the industry from a management point of view, how many licenses do we think that the industry has sold? Does anyone want to guess how many companies the whole of the MDM industry is supporting today? Okay, total silence. Who reckons it might be more than 100 customers? Yes. Okay. Who reckons it might be more than 10,000? Who reckons it might be more than 100,000? Okay. It's actually not. Across the whole industry, we all actually kind of at quarterly and annual financial results time, we release the number of customers that we have. So the number of organisations that are using the software. It adds up to around about 60,000. That's pretty terrible across the entire industry when you think about it. There are more than 60,000 businesses in the world. There are many, many more devices in the world than there can possibly be folks working in those businesses. So it means that there is something underlying here that's just not working with most of the technology. So what are the top 3 reasons that I've looked into this and I've found that things don't work properly for? First one is that the tools just aren't right. People have invested in the wrong set of tools. Now, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to obviously say that the right set of tools come from Microsoft. But it's more than that. It's about having a set of tools. It's not just one tool. There's multiple things that we need to think about to manage. The next one is that actually people have separated BYOD out. They've kept it on its own. They think it's a special case. And what I'm going to do is try and explain to you why it's not really that special of a case. And then probably the third reason, the one that's very hard to find any kind of technical reason, technical thing to be able to use to solve, is just the fact that we don't trust our employers. And that's a big issue. People don't have trust in the organisation that's managing their device. So let's have a think about why we don't have the right tools. The first reason is that a lot of people think that managing BYOD is having an MDM suite in place. It's not. MDM and BYOD kind of came around at the same time. And MDM, in part, was a set of technologies that were created in order to be able to help with the BYOD type scenarios. But when you look at MDM, it is not a deployment model. MDM is a management model. It's a set of management technologies. What do I mean by that? Well, the operating systems. They are looking for the information from an MDM. That means that there's an enrollment process on that device. It generally means that actually they're being given an XML file, and the XML file has a bunch of information in it that tells the device how to configure itself. It also has a protocol. In fact, there's a couple of protocols out there that we support in the MDM environment. And it's also the back-end services that provide all of that. But it's not BYOD. And yet, some people think that's all it's good for. MDM is actually way more useful for other things. It's a really good way of being able to manage devices that have one single task. It can be used to just lock a device down so that you can actually deploy that as an electronic point-of-sale device. It can be used to do the kinds of things where actually the company owns the asset. And what we're starting to see, and particularly with Windows, we're actually starting to see that over time, maybe MDM is going to become the main management technology that we'll start to see. We'll support the other stuff, but maybe MDM is going to snowball and become a much bigger set of realities. And the reason is, it's part of most operating systems. It's a part of what actually is the device. And therefore, it's not having to run extraneous agent software on top of the device. There's actually a sub-breakdown when we start to pull this apart. When we start to think about the different types of devices that we actually see out there, what you see very quickly is that they really fall into about 3 buckets. You've got your bring your own device type things, where people do literally go and buy their own device, take it into the office. Then you've got your task worker devices, the ones that are completely locked down. They have very little flexibility in what they can do. They might be an EPOS device. It might be a barcode scanner used on a production line. We then have the other bucket, which tends to be the corporate liable device, the CLD, also known as the choose your own device option inside of a lot of organisations. But basically, it means that the organisation owns the device and therefore has a lot of control over it. Now, the top one and the bottom one in that left-hand section, both are owned by the company. The company is liable for it. The one in the middle gets really tricky around having to pay people to use that device, having to give them a stipend. If you've got folks in places like California, You potentially have to legally give them all of their expenses back for the device. It gets really messy. I'm not going to go and explain any of that. What I'm going to spend my time on is on the things that we as IT people can actually deal with, and we can let HR and legal worry about the other stuff. So across on the other side are the kind of the main acronyms that the industry focuses around when thinking about how do we manage mobile devices, or any device in fact. First one is IAM, Identity and Access Management. I put that right at the top because you have to get that right. That's a really critical piece to making any part of any device program work. The next one is the mobile device management. Then we get into something called MCM. And this is some of these acronyms, they're kind of partly established, partly not. MCM is one of the ones which is kind of sort of established. It refers to mobile content management. It's the idea that you can control the data on the device. So you can put protections around that data, you can push the data to the device, you can remove the data from the device. A good example of that is actually the iBook store on an Apple device. That's actually a content management system. Particularly if you're in education, you'll know that you're getting textbooks from that store, pushing them down to the device. And then the area which is kind of coming up very fast and becoming one of probably the most important areas for innovation in the space is mobile application management, or MAM. And this is the idea of actually being able to control the applications on the device and tell the applications what they can do, what data they can access, what data they can't access. But here's the funny thing. I've been working in this industry, managing endpoints for my entire career. That's now going on for about 18, 19 years. I've always done all of those. I've always managed identity. I use something called Active Directory. I've always managed device management. I use something called SMS, or Novell ZenWorks, and then later Configuration Manager and Intune. I've always done content management. It's called a file server. And I've always done application management. I've always had to go and deploy applications, update them, manage them, make sure that they're safe and secure for the organisation. So when you look at it, it hasn't actually changed. It's just the same set of circumstances with mobile added to the front, which is kind of interesting. So what about if all of those things were just an extension of what you've already had? That would seem to be a relatively sensible way to take any of this and actually create it and deal with a bunch of different types of devices. And that's exactly what we did when we went to build out something called the Enterprise Mobility Suite. And we start off with that, with the idea of taking identity and access management. Who's using Active Directory? Did anybody not put their hands up? This is the most... Active Directory is the most adopted identity provider in the world. Almost every single company is using it. And the ones that don't actually make their own directories, and most of them are based out of Silicon Valley. So it's kind of a strange kind of situation that wherever you go, Active Directory is there. What we actually decided to do here was to make it so that Active Directory was more available. Because the funny thing about mobile devices is that they kind of started to make a paradigm shift happen inside of organizations. Because these little supercomputers that you put in your pocket are supercomputers, and they go in your pocket, they leave the company. They go everywhere. They get on an aeroplane, they travel to another country. And you might not have access to the on-premises stuff that you used to have access to. And that's why we built Azure Active Directory out in the cloud. We made it run in our globalized data centers all over the world so that anybody can have access to Active Directory wherever it is. And you can integrate that with your on-premises directory very, very simply. I'm actually doing a session a little bit later where I'll go through the process of setting up that synchronization. That demo will take me under 5 minutes. And it's actually amazing that we have that ability. We can literally take your directory and make it available everywhere more securely than you can probably in your own on-premises environment. So I'm going to take you through a walk through Azure Active Directory and show you a little bit of some of the nice things that we've put in there, like conditional access. These are the kind of tools that actually, they're not really available anywhere else. So let's start off inside of Chrome. Yes, it's the Microsoft guy using the Google browser. I'm actually signing in with about 5 different identities, and each browser can really only cope with one identity at a time, so hence the reason. So this is actually my Active Directory. This is my on-premises directory that's synchronizing with the cloud. All of these users are on-premises users, so they can go to any Windows 7, Windows XP, in fact, actually any Windows 2000 PC, and sign in with their on-prem credentials. Great. I can also do a few other nice little things with them. Like, say, for example, I see that, let's take Amy. Let's say that Amy has some work information. She's going to have some information inside of her Active Directory just to point out who she is. Great, kind of information you'd expect. I can also set things like authentication contact info. So every time she authenticates, we might want her to actually provide a second factor of authentication, like Catherine did inside of the keynote yesterday when she was adding her Active Directory device. Adding her Windows device to Active Directory. Another nice thing that we get here is this ability to see all of the devices that this user has signed in from. Now, there's not going to be very many in here, but I can also see all of the devices that this user has registered with the directory. What does that mean? Well, when I want to use, say, any work application on my phone is now going to be registered with the company. From there, I can actually go and see if she's got a device registered. I don't think she does. Okay. From here, I can actually go and then say, that device that was registered, we know that it's lost, so I'm going to block that device's access to Active Directory. That device can no longer use that identity. That's kind of nice, because that's the kind of thing that we've never had in the past. But part of the reason that this becomes very cool from a kind of global aspect is what we've built inside of reporting. And these are just there. There's nothing that you have to go and deploy to make this work. It just works. So here's something interesting. A few little ones of these reports. Let's go to sign-ins from multiple geographies. This report is going to show me where my users are traveling to and from. So you can see that actually I've signed in a few different times here. I've signed in from Auckland, I've signed in from Redmond, Washington, and it knows those things. It also knows the estimated travel time between those locations. That's really useful because this is going to flag in this report if I've been able to do something impossible. If I've invented a time machine or some kind of spatial teleportation system, this is going to tell IT that there's some IP there that we could go and license. No, it's going to tell IT that there's a problem because that can't exist. Well, it's going to actually say, this person tried to use their credentials in 2 places at the same time. Either somebody's stolen their account details, or they've outsourced their own job. You laugh. It has been done. That's the kind of information that we can give you at a glance, but it actually gets a lot better than that. We can give you much more information. We can give you information like people who have signed in from possibly infected devices. Now, this report is going to be blank because it's very hard to fake this information, so I can't do it easily in a demo. What we're doing here is we're gathering exhaust information. So all of that stuff that comes out of, say, endpoint protection, Windows Defender, all of our anti-malware products, when we get that information, we actually look at it and we say, hey, that IP address used to have a piece of malware on it, and one of your users just signed in. There's a good chance that somebody could have stolen that user's credentials from that machine. You really ought to go and investigate that. And that includes machines that aren't managed by you. So that means you could walk into an internet cafe in Thailand, you could go up to a machine, use your credentials, that machine could have had some malware on there, and your IT administrator is going to know so that they can put protection in place around your identity. But we can do stuff that's even cleverer. We have the ability to look at anomalous activity. Every morning, Alice signs on in Redmond, Washington at 9 a.m. She has done for the past 6 months. She uses a Windows PC. Tuesday, she signs in from Azerbaijan at 11 in the morning from a Linux box. She's never done this before. That's out of her regular habits. So we're going to tell IT that something may be wrong there, and you might want to investigate whether that user's credentials have been stolen. We do that because we can use machine learning to understand what users are doing over time and can highlight when these things happen. Credential leakage is one of those things which we see in the news quite a lot. It's been in the news very recently for a very, very large set of credentials leaking out. And believe it or not, we go and look at all that information. We have to. We actually go out there and we are looking for any credentials that have been leaked from your Active Directory in those leaks. We run our machine learning over all of that information and we mine that data and tell you if one of your accounts is in that information. And just think about it. Is there a chance that an employee of your company, who's maybe not too bright, has been using their corporate email to access one of those sites that got breached recently? Quite possibly. Do they now have some leverage over one of your employees? Potentially. Do they also have other information that could be used in order to access their account? Potentially. We're giving you the kind of protections and the kind of abilities that make a lot of sense. We've also added the ability to do auditing. And this is an obvious feature that you kind of need for anything like this, but the auditing allows you to know who's been using what devices where, and we can geolocate people's usage. Obviously, we have to do that to be able to tell you when they've been doing impossible travel, but it's the kind of information that becomes very, very valuable. I'm going to go into configure for a second. Okay, it's going to take it a second or two to load. Whilst it's doing that, we can kind of see the grayed out bits. So the first thing is multi-factor authentication. Any user can instantly receive multi-factor authentication. We just have to tick a box, and then they are prompted to enter their phone number so that they can subsequently receive a phone call in order to authenticate themselves as a real human being. However, you can also pre-provide that phone number for them. So if they've got a corporate phone, you can push the information in there. We can make it so that users can do their own password resets, so they don't have to call the help desk so often. Why is that important? Well, users have become more mobile. Having to call the help desk, particularly in the evening, is maybe not the most useful thing for your particular piece of social life. A little further down, what else can we do? Devices. People can register their own devices, and we can require them to use multi-factor authentication. When Catherine was in the keynote yesterday doing the Azure Active Directory join, this is what she was connecting to. We were actually saying that those devices were joining Active Directory. We have that capability on iOS and Android as well. So those devices, they don't join Active Directory in the same way that they do for Windows, but they do actually become entities inside of Active Directory. Wow, it's hugely embarrassing when your phone doesn't stop, isn't it? Other cool stuff that we can do. Group management. We can make it so that your users can have groups which will dynamically provision them into different groups based on their set of circumstances. Say they move into a different department. We can understand that. We can move them into different security groups. We can make it so that users can manage their own groups. I'll come back to application proxy. I'll come back to integrated applications. We can also make it so that certain people in certain locations, don't have to provide things like all of the extra multi-factor auth. Now, back up to the top and applications, because this is really important. If Active Directory just allowed you to be able to attach your device onto the network, it would be pointless. It really wouldn't be helpful. What do we use Active Directory for in an on-premises environment? We use it so that people get access to file shares and applications. So we have to do the same thing in the cloud. The funny thing was, mobile devices changed another paradigm. They changed the place that the application was, because these things help us to feed our data addiction. We want access to the data everywhere. So what did we see happening? Well, people had got their device, they liked it, they wanted to be able to do their sales. They were a sales manager. Where did they go for their data addiction? They went off to maybe Microsoft Dynamics, maybe Salesforce. They made an independent decision outside of the IT department to go and use one of those software as a service based applications. Suddenly, IT lost all control over it. So this is our attempt to be able to put IT back into control over those things. We actually have, out of the box, and I will go down and just add this, we have the ability to add, this changes on a daily basis, and yes, we've broken the 2,500 number. So over the course of the past 7 or 8 days, we've added 7 applications to take us over the number. This was just under 2,500 the last time I gave this. These are applications that within literally about 3 clicks, I'm fully federated and integrated with, which is pretty awesome. That now means that my credentials get used to access those sites, and they're my corporate credentials from Active Directory. I can also add custom applications, so anything which might be a little bit of an edge case, I can add it in. Anybody want to throw me the name of an application that they use? So let's go over here. Name of an internet-based application that your users use. LinkedIn, okay. Let's see if LinkedIn works. LinkedIn. Hey, we can integrate with LinkedIn. Anyone want to throw another one out there? Trade me. Okay, what's the joke? I need to know. What is Trade Me? I'm feeling... It's eBay for New Zealand. Okay. Am I going to get arrested if I go to this website? No. Okay. Is my wife going to divorce me? No. Okay. So... So this is actually a really good example to use for this. So we're going to call it Trade Me. Let's see if I can make the title bar slightly smaller and fit more in. There we go. Okay, we're going to hit Trade Me. We're going to go off to see this. It's going to add one in here. You can see that I've already pre-integrated with Air New Zealand, ANZ, ASB Bank, Box, AWS, Office 365, Citrix, SAP, and a bunch of others. Come on, get through that. There we go. Okay, let's go and configure single sign-on. We're going to use password vaulting for this. It's slightly quicker. It means I don't have to exchange certificates. Is the URL trademe.co? HTTP, trademe.co.nz. Is that right? www. Let's see if that might work without it. Let's see. Okay. All that's now doing is it's going off behind the scenes. It's loading up Trade Me. It's looking to see if there's on that screen any sign-in information. If it's looking for a username and password. It found it. I can click that. It's just letting me test it at this point. Oh, okay. It's because I'm doing it from within Chrome. So, I would then just say yes to that, assuming that I've just tested it and it works. Don't click to sign in. Let's click the next button. Done. That's it. I can do that with anything which is a web application, any website at all. And it will give me single sign-on all the way through. Or I can use any of the pre-authenticated ones, those 2,500 that are already in there. That automatically includes Office 365 as well. So if you're on Office 365, you automatically get the same single sign-on activity. I'm going to go back into my directory, and you can see... Yeah, that's screen scrape to do that. But we could do SAML if we wanted to, if we could go off and exchange the certificates with them. Yeah. Yeah, there is an advanced checkbox. So, let's go back down here, because what I want to just show you as well, I'm going to go into Applications. Now, the cool thing here is, actually I'm going to go to Reports. Cool thing about this, Integrated Application Reporting is in there, and I can go and do application usage. This will go and tell me who's been using what applications. I can also drill into these reports and see who used what applications where. So I can start to see where my users are moving around. I can see what devices they're using to access the applications. I get all of that information coming back to me. It's quite a detailed report, and it's going to take a while. And I don't have time to let it go through, so I expect that to load over a little bit of time. It also gives me the ability to spot things like provisioning errors. And what I didn't mention, as we were configuring that custom application, if it's doing something like that, and essentially it's form filling, you can actually set it so that it will cause rollover of the password, so that the password will continuously change. And that also means that the user never needs to know that continuously changing password, and that therefore means that you can share one set of credentials for a website, like Twitter, amongst a group of employees. So it gives you the ability to take, for example, a Twitter account and make it available to the whole marketing department. So it gives us some really cool options for what we can do. So that's a lot of our capability, and a rather deeper look than I was thinking, around Azure Active Directory and what we can do there. Let's think about this next building block. What can we do in terms of device management? So I'm going to walk you through very quickly through Microsoft Intune and what we've built out inside of that. So I need a different browser. So this is my Intune dashboard, just giving me a health view of everything inside of my environment. That's the wrong password. So it's going to show me what devices are enrolled, what devices have had applications pushed to them, what applications have had maybe an installation issue, what policies I've applied, who's using those policies, all across my enterprise. When the internet speeds up. Is that a problem in New Zealand? This is the life of anybody that works in IT, watching progress bars. It's one of the reasons why we're so high on caffeine all the time. Come on. Okay, so it's starting to populate. It's starting to tell me what mobile operating systems I've actually got out there, what devices are being used, what devices are being quarantined, and what devices have policy applied and what haven't. If I go into my groups, we'll actually start to see that this gets populated again from Active Directory. So all of my users will appear inside here. That is all of the users that I've actually explicitly said use Intune. So I have to go and say these users are licensed for Intune. But you buy all the licenses together. I'm going to go down to apps. This is where stuff starts to get interesting. So inside of apps, you'll see that I've actually published to my mobile devices almost all of the Microsoft apps. Sorry, that's actually not true. I published all of the Office apps from the Google Play Store and the iOS App Store to my devices. So now, if my users want those apps, they can go to my corporate application store and get hold of them. Or we can push the application down onto the device when they add their identity to the device. So those two things are starting to become one thing. If I go into policy, then we start to be able to see a little bit more around the really cool stuff that we do. So I'm going to go into configuration policies. And you'll see I've got a bunch of these. And one of the ways that I start to think about these is that these policies are like the new group policy. They do a lot of the same kind of things. Maybe with not quite to the same level of granularity and the same level of excess. Windows currently has over 3,500 group policy settings. It'd be kind of crazy to start replicating them all because they're not all used, but we have that ability. In here, for example, I've got a mobile application policy set up for an Android device. What's this going to do? Well, any of the applications that you just saw that are for Android that are able to use this policy are going to restrict web content so that it can only be opened in a secure browser, meaning it's not going to open in Chrome on the device, it's going to open in our corporate managed browser and potentially open up a VPN connection back to our on-premises environment if it needs to. We are going to make it so that people can't back up data from that application inside of their Android backup because we don't know where it's going to go. basically. We're going to say that the apps can only receive data from other apps that are also managed by this particular policy, meaning that Word and Excel can talk to each other, but Word and Notes can't. We're going to prevent people from being able to save their files to anywhere else other than our corporate location. We're also going to require things like PIN for access to the application. Not for the device, for the application. And that starts to become very, very important, because that's how we actually make it so that the data in the application is encrypted, in addition to the encryption on the device. We can do the same thing for iOS as well. And then we can also say things like we can block screen capture. So I actually keep that one turned off because that prevents me from being able to present from the devices. It really is good screen capture blocking, and it totally just blacks the screen out inside of any presentation. Other policies that we have in here are also kind of interesting. And I'm going to go down and find I'm going to find compliance policies. Let's go to that one for a second, because this is kind of cool. One of the things that we've invested in inside of Intune and Active Directory is the idea of something called conditional access. And this really is a conditional access policy. So what we're actually saying is if the device doesn't have these things in place, it's not allowed access to email, our SharePoint, our corporate applications. It can't join the domain. We are just going to refuse to talk to that device, which is awesome. And it's really important to be able to do this kind of thing, because not all operating systems actually respect the policies that you put on the device. One particular operating system is very, very nice in that the user has full control over the operating system, and they can actually continue to refuse to do things like encrypt it if they want to. So that's the kind of thing. This gets you around that problem. You can't refuse to encrypt the device because you then won't be able to subsequently access any of the services. It's like having kind of a firewall in place that you can't get through unless you've met certain conditions. It kind of feels a little bit like network access protection. But unlike network access protection, it works on every type of device. Once we have these in place, we can actually go into things like SharePoint Online, and we can do it with the on-premises versions as well. And then we can say, these users are blocked from access if their device is non-compliant. It's a checkbox. It then applies that previous policy that we just saw for this type of device, and it blocks access unless it's compliant. So that was a quick walk through Intune and what we can do inside of some of those capabilities and why we're investing in those. The next thing is our content management. And we think a little bit differently about content management from the way that the rest of the world does. Oops, what's happened there? Let's script these forward. Okay, we think a bit differently about this from the way that the rest of the world does. Content management for the rest of the world involves the idea that the information is going to stay on the device. But we don't just believe in that. As you saw in the keynote yesterday, we have this core belief inside of Microsoft, one of our worldviews, that mobility isn't just about having a mobile device. It's being able to move between different devices. And that means that the data has to be able to move between different devices. So our content management approach is something called Rights Management Services, RMS. Who's using RMS or has used RMS in the past? Okay. Was it easy to implement it? No, it was really painful, wasn't it? We've actually made it very easy to implement rights management through Azure. So Azure Rights Management is about a 3-step process to get it all set up and get it all working. And what it will do is it will protect your data wherever it goes. So I can take a file which can be automatically protected with RMS at the point I save it to a SharePoint or the point I save it onto a file server, and then the file is encrypted wherever it goes. But also, we have that Azure thing. So not only can it be encrypted, but we can see wherever it's being used as well, and what rights are being used when somebody does that. So we get audit trail. We can see when somebody opens up a document and they print it, and they're allowed to. We can see when somebody attempts to open up a document and they don't have credentials that work. We start to be able to see all of that. Wouldn't it be cool if you didn't have to worry anymore about your users leaking data outside of the organization by saving it on some random cloud service? That's what we're aiming for with this. So this is Azure Rights Management. Now, I'm going to try and do this over on this thing in a second. But before we do that, I'm just going to show you what this looks like inside of the Azure console. So I'm just going to go back one step here and go to rights management at the top. The screen's pretty big, so I'm not going to zoom in. I think everybody can see it. Is anybody having trouble seeing the screen? Okay, good. It's going to take it a second or two to load that. There we go. And let's go and find the one that I use for all of this stuff. Okay. This is how easy this is. First off, rights management works with templates because we don't want users to have to think, right, how do I need to protect this document? Do I need to make it so that Bill can only edit it, or do I need to make it so that Bill can edit it and print it? Or does he need to be able to edit it and print it and copy it? We don't want to do that. That's a really crazy way to go. So we actually create a couple of templates for you, which are a confidential template and a confidential view-only template. That means that when data is protected with those, it's confidential. You have to be a company employee to be able to access it. If it's confidential view-only, you can only view the information in there. You can't edit it. And then you can create your own templates as well. And you can combine the rights and bring them together. Now, the rights are given to the file for a length of time. The file has to be able to call home, but it has an offline cached kind of bit of information that tells it what the rights are. But if it can't call home in reasonable enough time, it'll just block access until it can call home. Home being Azure, the internet. What this means is that the file can go on somebody's device, and if you can't remote wipe the device, you don't have to worry, because even if it's never going to get internet access again, the information isn't going to be accessible after a length of time. And you can control all of that through the templates. Once you've configured the templates, you just have to deploy them out to your end users. Let's go back in there again. Oops, let's go into templates, and we might see a little bit more of this. Let's go to one of these that we can actually click in. There we go. Go to scope. Okay. So we can then say which templates are actually able to use, which users are actually able to use the templates by putting them into a group. Great. What does it look like when we start to see it on somebody's device? Well, I'm going to move us across to this thing, which is on 2, I think. What number has this been plugged into? Can you remember? Nope, the AV guy's not hearing me. Can you remember what number this is plugged into? 2. Let's try that. Getting nothing out from it. Start running through them. 3. 1. Ah, there we go, got it. There we go. Oh. It's gone for the wrong colour scheme. Okay, so it's a bit pink. I'm sure we can live with that. There we go, it's back again. It's also a little bit out of focus. Don't worry, you don't need to see the detail. I'm just going to go into the Word application here. I just type in, this is my PIN, the thing that was managed by that policy that we saw a few moments ago. It's a really hard to guess one. And I've got a piece of top secret product information that's open. Remember, we also had some policies that were set up inside of Intune. One of those policies was that we're going to require that any documents that we use, that any links from those documents open up inside of a managed browser. Well, it's exactly what's going to happen if I click that link. Just there. Okay, I've not connected it up to the network. It doesn't need to be. But you can see it moved over to the other browser. Go back into Word. You can also see across the top here, I've got this yellow bar. That yellow bar is the permissions bar. And if I bring that up, this file is telling me that I can't actually edit it. But I can copy it, and I can share it, and I can print it. I'll show you what happens if I try and share it. Can't do anything with it. I'm going to try and do it another way here. I'm going to try and send this as an attachment. Send it as a document. Turn it with Outlook. We have a policy in place which prevents me from being able to get the data off the device. So I've got like an extra level of security, almost the idea of defense in depth, whereby I have a level of security that protects me from my ability to accidentally do things wrong, and an ability to protect me from intentionally doing the wrong kind of thing inside of my business. Okay. Let's take a look at the next one. Application management. Well, I kind of just shown you all of that as we were walking through. It's the ability to be able to go and take applications and put not a wrapper around them, which is what everybody else does, but to be able to put policy around them. And that means that we don't have to go through a wrapping process every time. We can just tell applications that are in the store, because they know about things from an SDK, to say, actually, just apply this policy to the device. And that's what we kind of think of people needing as an end-to-end solution to be able to manage devices. You have to be able to do all those things. They're the things that you've always done inside of an IT environment. They're just updated a bit for the way that people now work, which is that they've actually kind of broken down the perimeters, the boundaries that we were used to inside of IT, and the devices have started moving around a lot more. So what about this idea that you actually need to think about the way that you're managing your devices? People have kind of shifted to this weird siloed approach. And the reason for that was that we were a bit slow, honestly. Microsoft was a bit slow in getting our products out there. And when that happens, you go off to other vendors and you say, actually, we'd like to use this solution for it because it's there and it's new and we've got to get this thing secured. So sorry about that. But there are now ways that you can start to bring things back together again. But not only that, we've thought about being able to make things like Configuration Manager, which is by far the most popular desktop, laptop configuration management software in the world, work with everything else as well. And in fact, Configuration Manager supports every single type of operating system on the market, with the exception of AS400. Yeah. I used to manage those. They're nice. So let's just think about those buckets for a second. We actually have taken this a lot further, and we start to think about this in the operating system as well. And this is one of those places where it's really good to be Microsoft, actually. We're the only company on the planet that makes both an operating system and our own management software. Apple don't make their own management software. Well, they kind of do. They make the Apple configurator, but it's aimed at less than 50 users. Basically, you have to connect your device to it. Google don't make management software. So we have this nice little synergy where we can actually get our engineers from Windows and our engineers from Configuration Manager into the same room, and they can talk to each other, which is kind of cool. So we've actually started to see a bit of an alignment inside of Microsoft around these three buckets. So the first one being our BYOD knowledge worker. They tend to be people who are working with information and making some sort of decision. Corporate liable has kind of tended to now move towards things that are a little bit more standardized in the way that they're doing things. You probably apply a lot of, let's get rid of my calendar, a lot of group policy to your corporate liable devices. You probably do things like, does anybody actually set somebody's desktop wallpaper to something very specific? Awesome. Any of your employees actually been mugged on a train to steal their device? Yeah. I used to work for a company where we literally had that problem. All of our devices had a company logo on the desktop, and we had an employee literally crushed over the head on the London Underground to steal their device because it had that bank's logo on it. So think about what you're doing with putting somebody's desktop wallpaper to something very specific like that. It can be making them a target. Though that level of standardization is very useful. It's a very, very good thing for organizations, and we do it because we want to reduce cost. We're going to have a bunch of those. The other place is that we have those devices that are task worker based. They're the ones that you might have on a production line. You might have in, say, a surgical operating theatre. It might be a heart monitor. Most of those things run Windows. So you have to be kind of thinking about how these things come together. But let's think specifically about what we do on a corporate liable device. We manage the identity, generally Active Directory. We manage the device, generally Configuration Manager, maybe group policy as well. We manage the content, the access to the file server. We manage the applications, the life cycle of them. The same is true of BYOD. We manage the device, manage the content, manage the application. And also the same is true of task worker devices. In fact, they're all the same. That's what you manage on every single device. So having completely separate silos with separate management systems just doesn't make sense. And that's the approach that we're trying to take. We're trying to take away that separated silo. And what we're trying to do with that is actually make it about the identity, because that person might move between different devices. So me as an individual, I use my Windows laptop, my corporate one, my Microsoft one. I get Microsoft group policy pushed down to that machine. Occasionally it means that my Surface will overheat in my laptop bag, because we have a very specific power policy that prevents it from going to sleep. Every so often, I also use another laptop, which is just Active Directory domain joined. It's not getting those group policies. It's more casual. It's more of my information worker device. I also use a smartphone. That's also joined to Active Directory. And yes, my smartphone is an Android phone. I also might use something very specific. I might walk into one of our conference rooms, and I might walk up to one of our really nice 84-inch PPI Surface Hub devices. I'll log into that. And for the period that I'm there, we need to know what I should have access to. So our identity becomes our control plane, and it's what we can use and leverage everything else off the back of. So the million-dollar question is, why on earth would you have those separate configuration management silos? It's very hard to find a real reason. The only one that I can think of is that for some reason in regulation, you need to have a separate team managing a separate group of devices. Now for the last section. This is my favourite section of this, because it normally is the bit that makes everyone go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. It's also the thing that I find the most worrying. I kind of like the anthropology of this. The first thing that we could do on a device was get hold of our email. And that was inherently normally corporate, because nobody really could afford the money to roll out a BES server for their own personal use, apart from Jay-Z quite famously had one. But that was the first thing. The next thing was that we all started to get smartphones. We all started to put our apps on there, started to use them. We got personal productivity. It's personally productive for me to be able to talk to my friends on Facebook. It's how I was able to meet with my friend Lee from Hamilton when I came over here. Great, that's letting me do stuff. But these devices have suddenly become very integral to my life. My device that now has my corporate email on it also has all the details from myself meeting my friend Lee. Then we've seen them move forward. We've moved our phones to be our wallets. Our credit card information is in these. I don't know, do you guys have Apple Pay yet in New Zealand? Okay. So in the US, Apple Pay is just exploding. This is a country that doesn't have chip and pin credit cards. It's insane. But we can now take our Apple devices and pay for stuff in stores all over the US. The really cool thing about that is there isn't really much in the way of a limit on those. In the UK, you can only pay with £30 onto an Apple Pay device. But in the US, you can pay thousands. You just use your fingerprint to have access to it. So now, the devices have access to all of our money. What's going to be the next thing? Personal identity. Not just it knowing about my friends, but probably my driving license. Probably my passport. The things that really matter to me as an individual. All of my identity. Now imagine the potential stuff that your end users are thinking here. Will your end user, who thinks that their employer is going to snoop on their device if they enroll it? Yeah, that's the real worry. How do we increase this level of trust with our end users? It's a very, very difficult thing to do. I actually did this study and we got a bunch of responses back for this, and it's about 60% of people responded that they didn't trust their employer to not snoop on their device. Yeah, that's exactly what they're thinking. They're thinking that their employer is going to be able to look at their device. Now, there's a bunch of stuff that actually you just physically can't look at. Most of the MDMs on most platforms prevent the organisation that's managing the device from having too much access. But our end users don't really know that. So we need to have really clear policy with our end users that says, This is what we're going to do on the device, and this is what we're going to look at. How serious is it? Well, I pushed this out there, and one of my friends, Andrew, who's been a friend for quite a long time, I know him from the Windows Media Center days. He's actually a software developer, doesn't work for Microsoft, totally independent. He just quit his job because he was forced to enroll his device into his company's MDM. He didn't like that. He literally quit his job. So we need to get our devices into a situation where they can be trusted. How do we do that? Apps. Apps are going to be the answer here. Apps are bookmarks in the brain. When you think of a social network, what do you think of? When you think of a chat application, what do you think of? This changes globally, so let's see what we come up with. WhatsApp, okay. Yeah. When we think of photo sharing, what do we think of? When we think of news as it happens, what do we think of? When we think of documents, what's the first application you think of? Word. Yeah. What's the first application you think of when you think of presentations? PowerPoint. Spreadsheets. Excel. Email. Outlook. They are bookmarks in your brain. They're what you're expecting to go to. That's how we start to make the trust happen. Some of those apps are very personal, and some of them are personal and work. Funnily enough, we're the only company that has that problem. There aren't very many apps that people use for personal reasons and for work reasons. Maybe Google Apps is one that potentially people do, but maybe only a few. So what if the apps became really worth it? What if the apps were worth enrolling for? That's what we're pitching for with the apps that we create. There's a few apps there. I actually gave up counting how many apps Microsoft had produced in the store, in the Apple App Store, after I went past 100. We have over 100 apps in Apple's App Store right now, and the vast majority of them are really highly rated by the users. Some of them are marked up as being essentials by Apple, which is kind of funny because they have their own applications in that space. Folks like The Verge are saying that the best Gmail application is made by Microsoft. It's kind of amazing. So, how do we make those things personal and safe? Let's see if we can get the Elmo to work again. I'm hoping. What am I doing wrong with the control of this thing? It's on 4, not 2. Okay. Right. Okay. So, let's have a quick look at this. All of the applications that we see people using for work and personal, we have actually, this is a bad one to choose. I'm going to go and choose something different. I'm going to go and choose Outlook. So, Outlook I'm using for work and personal. It's hard to see here. Sorry. This is my personal account. This is actually inside of my personal email. If I go up here, I can quickly switch over into my work email. One application. But here's what's kind of cool. There's some text there, and it says, watch what happens when I copy and paste it. I can copy it, and I can try and paste it into my personal account. Can't do it. Within the same application, we're putting up intelligent boundaries, things that make sense to prevent users from accidentally making a mistake. Now, here's the cool thing. There's a container there around the work application. There's a container around the personal application. Work can't access personal, and if we can configure it, we can configure it so that work can't access personal, and personal can't access work. That's really important. The same application allows us to do it. And anybody can do this. They just have to build the bits into their application using the SDK that we've created. That level of separation is going to start to become really, really important. Let's get us back to hopefully the deck on 7, I think. Maybe 6. Okay. So, what can you do to try and make it right? How can you try and get this right inside of your own organisation? End-to-end management tools. Don't think of one device. Don't manage the device. Manage the person. The identity is the control plane. And then finally, you've got to build user trust. You've got to do things that are sensible for them. That means have a policy that's in place, that you've spoken to HR, you've spoken to legal, and you have a clear dialogue with your end users before you put them into a box that they can't get out of. I like to talk about this stuff a lot. I'm very passionate about making sure that we get this right and influencing our engineering teams to do exactly that. There's some very cool stuff that we're doing internally, and one of the things that I'm incredibly interested in is how do we make it so that our software, our operating system, is more trustworthy from this point of view. For me personally, I'd like it if when I added my device into Active Directory, it turned around and told me what my company couldn't do to my device. That'd be refreshing, wouldn't it? So that's one of the things that I'm actually talking to our engineering folks about at the moment. And I'd love the feedback to know what kind of things you think would be useful. Now, before I go anywhere, I've got a bunch of T-shirts that I want to give out. So I'm going to start throwing these into the audience and try and kind of throw my arm off. One of these T-shirts is a special T-shirt because it's going to actually lead to a further prize. Okay, this is always fun. I can only throw so far, so I'm sorry about the people that are right at the back. Oh, everybody's trying to grab one. Did anybody see what happened to the guy in the US last week at the ball game? He was literally he went to grab the ball as the batsman hit it into the crowd, ran, and then went over the edge of the thing, fell about 40 feet. I think it made his bones quite sad. Okay, so somebody has one of those T-shirts. It's got a X on the label, on the washing instruction label on the inside. If you come up afterwards, I'm going to give you a little Bluetooth speaker just to say thank you very much for coming along. But thank you very much for coming along. That takes us to the end. Please connect, and that's it.